quick hit, to get into the curses in Deuteronomy 28, which we're just gonna hit a couple, maybe a few. You know, everybody always trying to debunk the so-called Negroes from being Israelites. They just want us to be a bunch of porch monkeys, and primarily it's Esau Edom. You know, he's the one mainly is trying to always discredit us. And say, oh, you ain't nothing. You just some African Americans, that was put on a boat, and you're really Africans, and you came over here and got put on a boat, got shipped over here, and now you just African Americans. When it comes to the so-called Negroes, they don't say we don't have no kind of history, but American history. They're like, oh, you niggas were just hanging out in Africa, swinging from vines and living in mud huts and stuff like that. You're not a known people until we came and got you and cleaned you up and brought you over here to the shores of America. That's what our captor has been telling us for years. Esau Edom, man, that we're nothing, man. We're just a low people without a history. We just popped up and just sprung out of Africa. We just have to be on the Esau Edom's, history and his way of living. But you're wrong though, E. You can't put us under your umbrella, man. We are the true biblical Israelites that's mentioned in the Bible. We are mentioned throughout the scriptures, and these scriptures, align with up the true biblical Israelites, the so-called Negroes, so-called Latinos, and so-called Native Americans. So you can see yourself in these scriptures. And if you have the spirit of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushua, you're definitely going to see yourself in the scriptures, and it's going to hit your spirit, like fire, man. Because when I was seeing them, when I first started coming aware to this truth, and Deuteronomy 28 was coming out, like, damn, man, they hit home, man. They hit deep. These precepts, this Bible, when it's taught the right way, it hits a lot of unanswered questions that I had. And all the questions I ever had that was never could be answered, the scriptures answered them for me. So the elect is not going to get off serving, get from under serving Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushua, man. We don't give a damn what kind of podcast you Edomites put together and what kind of, podcast you want to go around trying to debunk the so-called, blacks. You want to debunk the Israelites. We don't give a fuck what you come up with, man, or what you got to say. We know that we found our true power, and we know his name, and we know his son's name, and we're not going back. We're not going to stay upon, Esau Edom, man, and this white Christian Jesus, man. We ain't doing it. Most of us tried that garbage, and it didn't work, and it didn't have the answers for us. scriptures say, when Yahweh Shah said, my sheep hear my voice. My sheep know my voice. And when I was listening to these precepts and these scriptures, when this truth was coming out, I'm like, yeah, that's Yahweh Shah. That's the spirit of Yahweh Bashim Yahweh Shah, man. You know? And there's no going back. There's no going back into the world, being a nigga, being a so-called, Mexican speak or so-called prairie nigga, or just being a regular African American. That's not gonna happen anymore, man. I'm not going back, man. But we're gonna get this Deuteronomy 28 and 48. It says, therefore, Deuteronomy 28 and 48, Therefore shalt thou serve thy enemies which Yahweh shall send against thee, in hunger and in thirst and in nakedness and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he have destroyed thee. Yeah, this happened to the so-called Negroes during the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade. We had a yoke of irons put upon our neck. We had to depend on Esau Edom, the so-called white man, for everything: clothing, food, water, raiment, education, finances. Whatever questions we had to ask this fucking dirtbag, man. For our faith, we had to go to this. For religion, we had to go to this goddamn devil, man. So I don't want to hear nothing about all this slick talk. Talking about, oh, you can't see yourself in these scriptures. But yeah, it's okay for them so-called white people in Israel. It's okay for them to see themselves. They line themselves up with the scriptures. They try to. They don't line themselves up. They try to join themselves with the scriptures. But nobody's calling them out for nothing. It's just you so-called blacks. You blacks can't be it. And yeah, those yokes of iron, you can go Google that. Slavery, yokes of iron, and you will see the so-called Negroes with yokes of iron upon their necks, man. There's no debate about that. These Edomites like to say, well, there's been other people who went into slavery. True. There's other people who had yokes of iron upon their neck. Okay, true. Maybe that's true. But can you prove it? Where's the history? Where's the proof? But you can go to Google Images and you'll see a so-called Negro, a so-called black man from Africa that was on a slave cargo ship with a yoke of iron upon his neck. So fuck y'all, man. Let's go to Deuteronomy 28:68. Salaki. It says, and Yahweh shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. So how can we go into Egypt again with ships? There's no account of the Israelites going into Egypt with ships, man. All the accounts is that we walked down into Egypt, or horseback, or whatever the case may be, wagon, by foot. But how could we be going into Egypt again? Because this time it's a spiritual Egypt that we're into. And you could take out your dollar bill and look on the back and you see that pyramid on the back of that dollar bill. You can take your ass up to Memphis, Tennessee, and they got a big pyramid building up there. I think it's Cabela's or Dick's Sporting Goods or something like that. They got a damn pyramid out there. You know, you could take your ass to Vegas, and they got a pyramid out there. I think the name is Luxor. You can go out there, man, and go up to Washington D.C. They got all these Egyptian obelisks up there, man. You know, the Washington Monument is an obelisk. So we're here in Egypt again, man, with ships. It says, by the way thereof, whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again. Yeah, we shall not see the wilderness again. You know? It says, and there ye shall be sold unto your enemies. Yeah, we were sold into our enemies, man. For bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. And if you go into that word buy, in Hebrew, it would say redeem you. You know, really meaning that no one would come get us out of slavery, man. And nobody did. You know, we still here in slavery, in bondage. You know? So we're waiting on Yahweh Shai to come to redeem us, man. To come buy us. You know, that's what the elect is waiting on. You know, we're not sitting around waiting on Esau, Edom to really, to finally treat us like human beings, to give us a fair share, you know, to give us our own land, you know, here in America. We're not looking for that shit, man. You know, that shit's over. Waiting on E to do the right thing, man. He can't do the right thing. It's incapable of this man to do the right thing. It's impossible. He's not set up to do the right thing. You know? So we're not going to listen to the bullshit and the lies that Esau Edom has on these podcasts, these platforms, or whatever kind of shit he got going on, talking about we not the people. We are the people, always have been, and always will be the people, man. You know, you just get ready for slavery, you Edomites. Every single last one of you Edomites are going into slavery, man. There's no way of getting around it. You can't talk yourself out of it, you know? You going into slavery headlong, man. And we're gonna have it ain't gonna be no discussion about if we the Israelites or not by then, man. You're gonna know when you get them fetters of iron upon your fucking neck and then them shackles on your feet, man. You're gonna get those yokes of iron, man. Those curses are gonna come upon you. You know? They're gonna come down on you the hardest, man. With the rest of the heathens. But I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here, man. The spirit hopped on me to do a video. You know, and I pray this video was edifying to the elect. Hey, hold on, man. Shalom, peace and blessings. And before I get out of here, let me give all praise and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem.